Welcome to Get Real with Dr Ronaye, featuring Doctor of Clinical Psychology and Trauma Specialist Dr Ronaye Calvert, and Bindi Heit from Ethical Change Agency. So now I have a question that's directed specifically for you, Dr Ronaye, and it's from a man in Canada. And his question is, does trauma dissipate the more you discuss it with others?
I so appreciate this question. Like with most of our viewers, nothing is an easy answer, and thank you, because the whole idea about getting real is that it's not supposed to be easy. The more you discuss it with others is a broad term. I will tell you that whom you discuss trauma with and the purpose and intention with which you discuss your trauma leads to very different outcomes depending on the intentionality and purpose of those discussions and the innate knowing within your gut as to why you're having those discussions. So let me back it up just a little bit. There are trauma specialists such as myself that genuinely believe that in order to fast track your trauma healing, we are to rip off the scaffolding that's holding you together and kind of take you down to your core, where we feel like we're making progress if you are crying and coming undone and really kind of sniffling and crying and not knowing which end is up. And that is part of sometimes the healing process, absolutely. I mean, I've certainly gone through it myself where I've shed boxes of Kleenex at a time. But the intention of having those type of conversations is to have it with someone who really knows how to hold you and contain you in that trauma discussion, because it can actually be very re-traumatizing and quite damaging to tell stories in one of two ways. One way it's damaging is to tell a story almost as if you're making a grocery list. These horrible things happened to me, and I'm telling it to you with the tone of voice and the emotional connection as if I were telling you that I'm going to buy eggs from the store today. There's no connection that's being made there. So you're talking, but you're not connecting to your own narrative. That is damaging, because in telling a story from a place of disconnection, you're actually training yourself to disconnect more and more from your own emotions. And that is not the goal. The second way it's damaging is if you are allowed or push yourself or are pushed by another to do what I call comparing of scars. How deep is your wound? How hard and deep did it slice? And we bond through this bond of trauma where we are actually not identifying as individuals, but we are actually identifying on the basis of what our trauma is and what our trauma has taught us about ourselves. We actually own our trauma as an identity, not as something that we've been through or walked through, but something that we almost wear not only as a badge of pride, but as something that we identify ourselves by. So the more we talk about it, does it actually dissipate the effects of the trauma? The answer is yes, and with the right person and with the right intention. So when trauma therapy, when trauma resolution is done effectively, you feel as though you are breathing through and letting go of a little bit of pain each time. Even if it means that you're visiting that pain. You're visiting it for a short while, almost like a scuba dive. You dive deep And that person knows how to bring you back to the surface and give you air and help you realize that you are not your trauma, that you are not living depths beneath the ocean, that you dive deep and you come up for air and you are safe and you are in your body and you are sound and you are stable. If it feels as though you are shoved underwater and kept there to the point where you can't catch your breath, that is not trauma work being done correctly. It is not helpful to have relationships based on comparing our wounds. To say, oh, you've been through trauma? So have I. Now we're best of friends. Let's act out our trauma on each other. Trauma bonds are very, very powerful and can often be confused as love, can often be confused as friendship. And it's not that the intention is wrong. It's that we are identifying as victims of trauma and therefore re-traumatizing ourselves and each other in that process. The idea of discussing trauma is not to relive every aspect of it. We have very, very powerful brains. Our neurology itself, at the core level, makes certain that we do not process all of the trauma that's happened to us at once. Our subconscious, our brainstem, actually ensures that trauma does not flood forward, because our constitution as human beings could not simply handle all that we have been through, flooding our system all at one time. And when we actually unlock doors to our trauma, opening that up like Pandora's box and having absolutely no containment or safety within that, is actually the worst case scenario to get to the other side. As a trauma specialist, chipping away at the layers of trauma, helping the unconscious become conscious, putting you in the control seat to understand that the things that happen to you and the things that you have taken part in do not define you, but have molded you and shaped you and are important. To give them voice, to give them a place at your table with which to heal, to embrace them as matters that catapulted you, to embrace each situation that has occurred as a stepping stone toward your future, to learn how to utilize each moment of hurt or pain as something that you have gained some gift from, most especially insight into yourself. That is where trauma becomes a gift. Not that as I stated before, I am not someone who believes that bad things have to happen to good people in order for us to get to the other side. But I am someone who absolutely believes that if bad things had to happen, then we need to harness the good. We need to harness the lesson in each one of those moments and make them count. And so discussing your traumas merely to discuss it, I do not believe dissipates the effects of trauma. I do not believe that having discussions about the comparison of one wound being deeper or more severe than another does us any good. Not only for the person that we're telling it to, but certainly for ourselves. I do believe that acknowledging what we've been through and embracing ourselves as not only people who have survived trauma, but as people who are stronger, better, more resilient, more insightful as a result of that trauma, who learn how to remain with an open heart, having embraced that insight, but not having that insight mean that we push others away because we're jaded or we're afraid. The worst thing that we can do is let trauma define the way in which we love, the friendships that we hold dear, the way in which we embrace life, the way in which we are inspired to live our best possible future. That to me is taking the sting out of the trauma that occurred and instead breaking it down to the lessons that the trauma had to teach us. If it doesn't feel like you're moving forward and instead it feels like you're dragging a dead body behind you, that's making you stagnant and that's holding you in your place, that's all you need to know that a change needs to happen. Who you are talking to and the way in which you're talking about it needs to change. It needs to feel safe, and it needs to feel like you are evolving at a pace that feels comfortable, at a pace that feels contained, and at a pace that continually reminds you that while trauma is something that happened, trauma is not synonymous with who you are.
And Ronaye, as a trauma specialist, probably one of the most important things that you would do is provide that safe space to hold for someone to actually share their experience and let go of some of that pain. So really, in summary, you've got to be really careful on who you share that with and whether they're capable of supporting you through that.
Absolutely. The idea of being a trauma specialist is not something that I take lightly. It's not something that any healer comes by without walking through their own fire. And by no means do I think I'm perfect. But I do believe, as we've said before, that you can only take somebody as far as you've gone. And if the idea of trauma therapy, if the idea of doing that clinical work is to be in any way exploitative, or to in any way not understand the honor that it is to walk somebody through those steps, if we lose track of the goal here, we're not doing anyone any good, and in fact we can do a whole lot of damage. Moving through should feel as though you can see, as you look through your past to your present, and as you portray your future in front of yourself. It may not be a straight line, but you should be able to easily identify that you have found the person and the guide that is going to safely lead you through the other side. And if you have not found that, that is not something for you to own as a client and as a person, as an individual. A connection between a clinician, a provider of care, a healer, and an individual is a relationship. It's a sacred relationship. And not all relationships work. You are interviewing them just as much as they are interviewing you. So finding that right fit with whom you feel safe and with whom you can actually do that work to move forward and get to the other side, that is something that requires tremendous courage. And a lot of times when we meet doctors, providers, clinicians, we're afraid to say, this doesn't feel right to me. This feels like, this feels a little too, but at the end of the day, if we can't say it for ourselves, who else is going to speak up for us? Clinicians are the quote-unquote experts, but they're not experts on your gut. Your gut will always know the answer more than anybody else. And so teach us how to best help you. There's no greater of an honor as a trauma specialist than to walk someone through the steps toward freedom and to watch them actually be free.